As this morning, I will introduce the first speaker, and they will come up, they will speak, they will return. Once all speakers have presented, I'll then invite them to come to the podium using the left-hand side. Also, just a quick housekeeping. Some of you may have registered and want CM credits for the APA or AICP. Please remember to do the evaluations, which will be online. You will go to the website, invisiblehouston.com, to the panels. When you select the panels, the evaluation should come out there for you. Don't check it right now because the evaluations are still closed. It will be open soon. On that, I'd like to give the projector a time to come on, be on shortly. But in the interim, our evening speakers include Dr. Carl Eschbach of the University of Texas Medical Branch. He's a professor in the Department of Internal and Preventive Medicine and Community Health Geriatric Medicine. He's also the director of the Population Research at the Seeley Center on Aging. His presentation will address disparities in mortality between blacks, whites, and Hispanics. If I can welcome him to the podium, Dr. Eschbach. Your presentation.
So this conference presents a little nostalgia for me. I don't go back 30 years with Invisible Houston. I only go back 18. I was hired in 1995 by University of Houston in the sociology department to teach urban studies, and I told my dear friend and colleague there, Nestor Rodriguez, who many of you may know, that going to be great fun teaching urban studies, but I don't know anything about Houston. Right? I was moving here from Madison, Wisconsin. So he suggested two books, Invisible Houston and Free Enterprise City. So that's what I read the next week, and enjoyed both of them immensely and learned. It was a wonderful introduction to the city. Now, when I got here, I found a lot of, again, I say I wasn't a Texan. I had mostly been living in northeastern and midwestern settings. So a lot of people were introducing to the city. A lot of the white folk that I met mentioned to me that, oh, Houston is a great city. Race relations here are great. The black and brown populations tend to be very middle class, and there's not much strain or inequality. And so my reaction to that was to think kind of, well, okay. I mean, not everyone was telling me that, but I'd like to see some facts. So this talk is in that spirit, and it's the talk poses a question. Actually, it should be a question mark at the end of it, because it is a question. Are mortality differentials between blacks and whites and blacks and Hispanics closing or growing 1990 to 2010? Now, so I've got some straightforward empirical questions that I think are important questions. What are the trends and differentials in mortality in the greater Houston area, which I define using the current metropolitan definition? What are the causes, what are the specific causes of death? What are some of the geographic differences? And what I will address today is comparing Harris County to what you might call the suburban counties. And then, to ask, to respond to that assertion that this was a great place to be black and brown by asking, is Houston an unusually healthy or unhealthy? I think a lot of us don't know the answer to these questions. I know I didn't. I didn't until actually I looked at this. I'm a great fan of, I have to say, of mortality data. So hear me out. It it may seem, well, a little bit morbid or even mortal, but it's kind of an important indicator of health. It's the most important indicator, not the only one, but it's a really important one. It's very well measured, and it's measured on on a county basis throughout the country, and now increasingly at lower levels of geography. So we can use it as a tool for studying disparities. I recommend strongly to your attention the work of Nancy Krieger, who set up a disparities monitoring project at Harvard School of Public Health to use mortality data to look at disparities and to track them over time. And that's, I think, an important component of why this is important. The data I'm going to use are all-cause and cause-specific mortality data from the State Department of Health Services with linked to denominators from the census. The rates are quote-unquote age standardized, which simply means we net out the effect of age differences by assuming that every population has the same age structure, so that we can take that out of the equation to understand disparities. Now, where do disparities in mortality come from? They can come from a lot of different sources. I certainly won't untangle in the next 15 minutes what they are, but differential opportunities arising from social position, right? Social inequality, differing health and healthcare behaviors, differing access to quality healthcare financially, so insurance coverage, provider-client relationships, resources available to physicians that treat different populations, different environmental exposures, and of course different social exposures. The effects, that strong strand of research on the effects of racism and discrimination on what's called weathering, the accumulation of stresses over the life course and its impact on the body. So disparities have a lot of origins, but I think an important thing, and what I want to highlight here, is, we all know, you're not going to be surprised, you're going to learn that in the Houston area, African Americans have higher mortality than Anglos, right? That's not going to be a surprise on average. Depending on how much you know, you may be surprised to learn that Latinos have lower mortality, but that's another matter that I'm not going to focus on. It's called the Hispanic paradox. Anglos think it's a paradox if anybody lives longer than them. But what I want to call to your attention here, and commend to the power of the data, is that we should not assume that disparities are standing still. Mortality is trending downward for all groups. Healthcare is changing. Our understanding and response to health risks are changing. Our social and economic inequality is changing. Note, I'm not saying it's changing for the better. I'm just saying it's changing. Social norms about race relations are constantly changing. So a lot's changing. And I think a lot's changing in mortality. So we have every reason to believe that we're going to see trends, and we have every reason to believe that they might diverge, and that is, I think, what we can learn from these data. So a quick introduction here, a quick overview. This is trends in life expectancy at birth for black men compared to white men, black women compared to white women from 1930 through the most recently available data in 2008. So life expectancy at birth for black men in 1930 was 48 years roughly. For white men it was 59 years. It's risen over time to 71 years for black men and 76 years for white men. Black women, life expectancy has increased from 49 and a half years to 77.3. For white women from 62.7 to 80.9. So both groups are enjoying greater longevity, and there's some there's some closing of the gaps implicit in those numbers. Latino men and women we just have measured now for the first time in 2006, and this is, again, the data is suggests that Latino men live a couple of years longer than white men, and Latina women live 2.5 years longer than white women. So a distinct advantage, and again, a topic for another day. Another way of looking at mortality and comparing is to look at age standardized death rates, and here now we're going to start to getting some comparisons. So this is deaths per 100,000. Again, this is assuming that everybody's age structure is just what the United States age structure was in 2000. Just so we can take out the effect of age. And you see here that for African American men, the mortality, age standardized mortality was 1,132 per 100,000 in 2010 in the United States. Metropolitan areas were a little bit lower. Texas was a little bit higher. Houston was a little bit higher than Texas, a little bit higher than the United States. Latinos, well, again, I got the 15-minute signal, so so I'll focus on blacks and Anglos. You see lower mortality for Anglos, but again, the same pattern of higher mortality, slightly higher mortality in the Houston area. Slightly higher disparities in the Houston area. This is disparities. These are ratios of black mortality to Latino and Anglo mortality, and you see you see here slightly higher mortality compared to Latinos for black men, about the same for, well, largely the story is about the same across different areas. Group specific comparison, this is for all groups, mortality is a little bit higher here than it is elsewhere. This is trends in mortality rates in the Houston area from 1990 to 2010. So taking that 2010 number as the endpoint, seeing African American mortality dropping from 1,300 to about, this is pooling the races, so pooling men and women, dropping about 400 deaths per 100,000 over that 20-year period. Anglos dropped from about 1,100 to about 800, so a somewhat smaller decline, and Latinos are smaller yet. Percentage decline for African Americans is 28%, for Anglos is 21%, 14% for Latinos. Now, what are some of the causes that are contributing to this difference? Well, this is showing you some important causes, showing you the declines: cancer, stroke, heart disease is certainly the largest contributor. Heart disease deaths among African Americans in the Houston area dropped from close to 450 to in the range of 200, 250. And notice, visually, closing of the gaps with the trend for Anglos. Diabetes, not so much of a trend. Motor vehicle accidents, a fairly strong decline for African Americans, and homicide, a very strong decline for African Americans and not so much for other groups. So the last thing that I want to look at as in these data are trends in different areas, and this is showing you, and the next slide is going to be the most interesting slide of all, and one I was surprised to see when I saw it. This is trends in mortality per 100,000 in Harris County. You're seeing a decline, but a fairly shallow decline for African Americans in Harris County. But this was what surprised me, but I assure you, again, these are facts and well measured. I heard this morning, I wasn't here, but I was watching on the net about some of the redistribution of the African American population to the lands, to the other, which is a major trend. Well, I can tell you that the data suggests that in 2010, Anglo-African American mortality in the 8 suburban counties combined actually converged. I'm not sure, notice that, that you have jags up and down, and I can't promise 2011 will be the same, but notice a substantial closing of the gaps substantial closing of the gaps for the suburban counties. And this slide is showing us, is just quantifying for us, both in numbers in the left panel and percentages in the right. Again, you're seeing which causes of death are contributing most to the narrowing of the gaps, and the answer is, in short terms, heart disease, lower heart disease mortality. The benefits have disproportionately been accruing. Hasn't closed the gaps by any means. There are still large gaps remaining, but there is a substantial narrowing. So, summary of my findings. Houston area has slightly higher all-cause mortality than the U.S. and all metro areas, slightly lower than Texas. Disparities pertaining to African Americans are slightly lower in the Houston area compared to the U.S. Mortality rates continue to decline for all groups. The decline is substantially a decline in deaths from heart disease. Mortality is declining faster for African Americans and for Anglos, and much faster than for Latinos. The mortality declining differentials are driven substantially by declines from deaths from diseases of the heart. And finally, the gap appears to be closing in the suburban but not the urban counties. So I think this is, I don't have time to explore what it means, but I think it means a lot. I think we should be looking at it in terms of understanding what the still very large disparities are, what's contributing to them, where there are avenues for further closing the gaps. Thank you.
We thank Dr. Eschbach, and now the second panelist is Dr. Lauren Reisel of the University of Houston. She's authored over 50 peer-reviewed publications on the relationship between socioeconomic status and health. She's also associate professor, educational psychology, and a licensed psychologist in Texas. Let's welcome her. Allow me to assist her and have her slides for you. Dr. Rice.
I tend to be loud, so hopefully this is okay if I push it back a little. Okay, thank you. So there's a growing interest in how the neighborhood environment and neighborhood factors affect health and health behaviors, and in particular, how much the environment or the neighborhood environment contributes to health over and above individual level factors, which is what we usually look at. However, very little research has focused on African Americans in this regard, and so there's obviously a need to increase the research in that area because African Americans, as you know, are at particular risk of health disparities, and so we need to better understand how the neighborhood environment affects African American health in order to better inform policies and interventions. So overweight and obesity is of particular interest in this area because one of the disparities that African Americans face is higher rates of overweight and obesity. So this is national data that show us among black men the prevalence of obesity is about 38.8% versus 36% among white men. But if you look at it among women, this disparity is even more striking, where we have almost 60% of African American women meeting criteria for obesity versus 32% of white women. And you know overweight and obesity is related to a number of different health risks, including cancer, but certainly not limited to cancer. And the gap in BMI, or body mass index, is also widening between African Americans and whites as well. One thing we know about black neighborhoods is that they tend to have a higher proportion of fast food or a higher density of fast food restaurants than white neighborhoods do. And studies suggest that the more fast food is available, the more likely people are to eat it. And this relationship is particularly strong among African Americans relative to whites. So putting this together, it shows us that African Americans may be more likely to consume fast food if it's available, and it tends to be more available to them based on where they live. A recent study looked at this. It was from using a sample of 4,500 African Americans from Jackson, Mississippi, and they looked at the relationship between fast food restaurant density and body mass index among 4,500 African Americans. They didn't find a relationship. So that's a little piece to the puzzle. But there have been a number of other studies conducted in this area with mixed findings overall, mostly done among white folks. No previous study, however, had looked at the relationship between how close people live to fast food and BMI among African Americans, and no one had further looked at whether or not people's income played a role in that relationship. Of course, fast food is designed to be particularly affordable, so income might play a role in these relations. So that was what our study was designed to do. So the purpose of my presentation is to present the results of the study that we did, particularly which was designed to redress these gaps in the literature that I mentioned. And then I want to take more of an anecdotal look at one Houston community, the 3rd Ward, and look at some changes that may have happened in the 3rd Ward over time with regard to the fast food and the greater food environment as well. So our study sample was from a collaboration between MD Anderson and the Windsor Village United Methodist Church in town, which is about a 98% African American church with a membership of about 19,000 members. The partnership was called Creating a Higher Understanding of Cancer Research and Community Health. We were focused on better understanding cancer risk factors among African Americans. And our inclusion criteria were quite broad. We just wanted adults that lived in the Houston area, that attended church. They didn't necessarily have to be members, and they had a functional telephone number. The idea was to be as inclusive as possible. This was a convenience sample, and our total, what the total sample looked like among 1,500 people was it was mostly women, reflective of folks that attend church generally. 75% women. Mean age was about 45, although we had a range from 18 all the way to, mid-60s. And with regard to income, there was also a broad range. About 25% of the sample made about $40,000 in household income or less, and 75% of the sample made over that amount of money. This is a visual of race ethnicity in Harris County, Texas, with a focus on African Americans and whites. This is Houston, and you can see the black dots are African Americans, each dot representing 100 persons from the census in 2010, and the orangish dots represent white folks, and you can get a visual that we still are certainly, there are certainly segregated areas in town. This is the spatial draw of our study sample. As I mentioned, Windsor Village, which is located here in town, has a very wide membership, and folks in our sample came from all over the city of Houston. So what we did was we looked at fast food addresses from Info USA, which is now Reference USA, which has the addresses of many businesses across the United States. And what we defined as a fast food restaurant was basically any place where you go in, you pay at the counter, and you use plastic cutlery to eat, or somewhere that had kind of a drive-through. So limited service restaurants, including hamburger and hot dog establishments. We geocoded these addresses as well as the addresses of the folks in our sample, which just means that we associated their physical addresses with the location and space. And then we calculated the density of fast food restaurants around where our participants lived, and we also calculated how close they lived to the closest fast food restaurant. BMI was measured in person. All of our folks came in to the church, and we calculated their height and weight to calculate their BMI. This is a visual of the fast food restaurants in Harris County, Texas, that's overlaid upon a map that shows us the percentage of African Americans, with darker red indicating a higher proportion of African Americans. So these are our fast food restaurants. They're all over the place in Harris County, like many other places. Our variables of interest included density. Here we see, Here we see a fictional participant living at this location in space. We created 3 density buffers around each person's home at various lengths. And we use the road and street network buffers in order to do this because fast food restaurants are not located in the middle of a field. And the way we calculated density was we just simply counted the proportion of fast food restaurants that were around the home in each of these buffers and divided by the area in the buffer. For proximity, here's a fictional participant's home. We just calculated along the road and street networks the distance to the closest fast food restaurant. I won't bore you with statistical details, but let me tell you that we controlled for a lot of things in our analysis because we really wanted to get at the unique relationship between these fast food environmental variables and body mass index. So we controlled for a number of different individual level variables, a number of things that we knew that were related to engagement in physical activity, as well as body mass index, physical activity, etc. And we also controlled for the median household income in the area because we know that this is also related to the prevalence of fast food restaurants. So here's what we found. With regard to the density of fast food restaurants, by the way, here's the mean number of fast food restaurants, just to give you a visual. Within a half a mile of our participants' homes, 2.5 fast food restaurants. About 5 within a mile of people's homes, about 11 within 2 miles, and 71 fast food restaurants within 5 miles of their home. The overall results for fast food density, well, it was non-significant, just like they found in Jackson, Mississippi. There was no main effect of the density of restaurants around our participants and their BMIs. However, what we did find was that this mattered for people of lower income in our sample. For that 25% of people making $40,000, less than $40,000 a year in income, there was a significant relationship between BMI and fast food, such that the closer you live, such that the higher density of fast food restaurants around your home, the higher your BMI. And this was the case for the half-mile buffer, the 1-mile buffer, and the 2-mile buffer, but not the 5-mile buffer, which might suggest to us that there might be something about this immediate accessibility that matters. This is just a visual for that. With regard to proximity, on average, people lived 1 mile from the closest fast food restaurant. And people of lower income were more likely to live closer to a fast food restaurant than people of higher income in our sample. And for this variable, we did get significant main effects, such that the closer folks lived to the closest fast food restaurant, the higher their BMI was. We also found that this relationship was particularly significant among individuals of lower income, as defined in our sample as $40,000 or less a year in household income. So what does this mean? What do these links mean? Well, fast food is specifically designed to be more affordable and more convenient to people. And so perhaps the closer fast food restaurants are to someone's home, the more you pass it, the more you smell it when you go by it, and the more that that intentionally creates reactions in people. When I smell French fries, I want French fries. That's normal. And so if it's really close to your house and you pass it and you see it, it just is really in your mind. And perhaps that's why people are eating it more often. And this proximity issue, how close you live, might be particularly important because you really only need one fast food restaurant to purchase food. And the closer it is to your house, the easier it is to purchase. And of course, if you don't have transportation, you don't have regular transportation, or within your home you share a car, if something's within a mile of your house, you can actually walk there and get it. So what does this mean policy-wise? Well, we could suggest that zoning laws or conditional use permits, and this has been suggested, should be used to move fast food restaurants out of residential areas. Is this the right course? I'm not sure that it is, because for many communities, this may be one of the main sources of food where people can go out to get food. So we don't want to take that away from people. However, what this says to me, one of the take-home messages for me, is that this medicalized view that overweight and obesity is an individual problem that's the fault of the individual, that's due to a lack of control, a lack of willpower, is perhaps not the whole picture. Perhaps we need to consider that there are effects of the environment and that the environment sets us up in such ways to facilitate some behaviors and to constrain other behaviors. And therefore, if we look at affecting overweight and obesity, we need to consider the effect of place on that health behavior. Of course, there are limitations to this research. I'm happy to discuss those further. But now I want to take a closer look at one Houston community. This is the third ward in Houston. Again, this is, you can see the purple dots, African Americans. So we see that it's a largely African American community. I'm sure that y'all are familiar with it. Historically African American community, very nearby to us right now. It's, this is just a snapshot. This is just, one area, but it shows us what the experience of that area is. And just so you know, the median outcome in the median household income in the third ward is about $10,000 less than the average within Houston. So what does the food environment look like in this neighborhood? Well, this is a visual of grocery stores in the third ward. Each grocery store is indicated by a little dot here, a little gray dot, and you can see the radii among this. Anything that's green or green shaded is supposed to be really good. That means it has good access. So this looks like a pretty good picture. However, if you dig a little bit deeper, what we see are, these are the grocery stores. Beer, wine, and cigarettes. Last time I checked, not part of the food pyramid. Quality food market. This might be more of what we want. A large Kroger grocery store, over thousands of feet of fresh, healthy food and food options. Does it exist? Well, there are a couple. There's one, in fact, right here, this one is the Kroger store that I just showed you. And you can see that it's a little green over here in this area of the third ward. There's another store here, another store here. It's a little bit green. It looks like it might be okay, maybe, but I want to draw your attention to these red areas, which means no access, and also point out that the access to these great grocery stores is across major highways, major freeways. You can't walk to them. You have to drive to them. So maybe that's not such a good picture. So 2006, data that we have from 2006 looks specifically at fast food. Here's what we've got for fast food in the greater third ward area. We've got some KFCs, some Wendy's, some McDonald's, and a Taco Bell. What does it look like a few years later? Well, we've got about the same number of fast food restaurants in the third ward, but we do have a couple Subways here. And all fast food is not created equal. There may be some more healthy options here at Subway. So have things changed? Maybe a little more in the healthy direction, but we still have a long way to go. So the take-home points are that we need to consider basically the effect of place on overweight and obesity, and we need to look at specifically how this relates to African Americans and African American neighborhoods. And this was the study that I presented, and this is my research support, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. We have now next to me Dr. Lester King. He's currently at Rice University. He's a certified professional planner, specializes in sustainable development, planning and development of sustainable indicators for Houston. His presentation will address sustainability of black neighborhoods in Houston. I would assist him and get his PowerPoint ready. Are you here?
Yeah, she said it was.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, sweet.
Dr. King,
Let's control
please. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I actually came to this university the first time in 1998, and I haven't left since, being just maybe 5 miles around the corner. I only have 15 minutes today, so what I want to show you is an overview of the kind of research I'm working on at Rice University. And I want to evoke your questions. I'm very interested in folks contributing to this research and the kind of answers and solutions that comes out of it. So I'm very interested in your questions. So at several points during the presentation I might stop, and that's going to be a moment where you guys please engage yourselves with maybe how do you explain XYZ, or how do you explain things as they might come up. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation. So the overview is basically a background, a few findings, then I'll get into, looking at race and ethnicity in Houston, primarily the two major minority groups, the Black and the Hispanic groups, and then sustainability of minority neighborhoods, and then we'll close with a summary. So this research that I'm working on, it's, basically we started this 2 years ago. The Shell Center decided they wanted to do something on sustainability indicators. We were obviously going to focus on the Houston area. And so they asked me to step in and kind of offer some suggestions in terms of, how to approach this topic. So these 4 boxes kind of give you a sense of all the considerations that have to be taken into consideration, obviously, to pull this off. It's about big ideas. It's coming up with, actually, Stephen Kleinberg, who was here this morning. I don't think he's here anymore. His suggestion was to come up with big ideas to guide this kind of research. What are those for Houston? It has to be interdisciplinary if you're going to do sustainable development. You have to take into consideration, obviously, the social, the economic, and the environmental constraints that we have. There's going to be a measurement option here where clearly, you have to be able to speak languages across disciplines. What do architects care about, and what does that have to do with geologists? Can you speak the same language? So you have to figure out how to measure many different types of things all in one place. And then there's the reporting component. How do you take this away? How do you present this to a city council member who has like 5 minutes, or to your mother or your grandmother at home, so that they might as well be engaged in the findings? So this is a kind of overview. Here's a quick look at the advisory council that was put together, advisory board, excuse me. And they all have at least 20, 29, 30 years of experience. But again, I included this slide, and I keep doing it because I want to stress on the multidisciplinary aspect of the project. So this guy is a geologist. Jim Blackburn is an environmental lawyer. John is actually the director for the center. Stephen was here this morning. He's got 29 years of experience. He's a sociologist. Then Ragsdale is a political scientist, and Ron is an economist. And together, again, we're talking about one project across disciplines. What I also did was to invite experts to campus. Some of you were invited, some of you came to campus to weigh in on this thing. We've done 6 of these types of expert workshops where I came up with a list of indicators based on literature review, best management practices, and asked the experts to weigh in on their thoughts. I also presented to them some performance on how the city was doing to get their sense of what could be appropriate targets, etc. So we did this across six different workshops. And you can see the kind of institutions that were represented, TSU, UH, there's Rice here, some of the management districts, and as well the City of Houston participated, the Sustainability Office. So our first report was released last year, and it looked at Houston, the City of Houston. We don't have a lot of studies coming out on the City of Houston level because it's much easier, as some of you may or may not know, to get data, especially economic data at the metropolitan level and or at the county level. So if you're going to do Houston, you've got to do some cracking. Usually GIS helps, but some people, as you've seen, also did primary research where you can go with a survey and actually get down to the neighborhood level. This was done at the Houston level, and we looked at approximately 30 indicators over time from 1980 through to 2010. We looked at the decennial surveys for the most part. I'm not going to get into the details. I just wanted to, again, give you an overview of the status of the project. Here are a look at some of the themes, the sub-themes, and the indicators. When Kleinberg asked to identify the big ideas in Houston, I immediately thought about the theme, sub-theme type framework in sustainability indicators. Those of you who might be interested in sustainability may be familiar with that framework. But it suits well to identify the big topics. So basically, this theme would be the big idea in Houston. What do people care about poverty in Houston? What do people care about livability? And then under that, I can do a sub-theme, then I can do an indicator. And what I'm doing here is capturing many different types of themes and best management practices, et cetera, to be able to address those in the research. What we also did was to come up with 3 colored icons to give a person a snapshot, either a council member or your grandmother, a snapshot of whether or not we're trending in a good direction, which would be green, or amber would be kind of a neutral direction, or red, which would be a bad direction. The color on this slide isn't great, but those are amber icons, and these are red icons. So what I wanted you to see was a snapshot of the types of themes that were covered, but also to get a sense of the range of color variation. Because you can't see the color so well, the 0 is kind of the neutral, the negative is the negative, and this plus here is the positive. So there was like 1 plus across all the indicators, and that was for primary jobs and green jobs. The reason why we thought it was positive was when we looked at the data, we recognized that primary jobs are primarily considered jobs that bring new capital into a local economy. And those are primarily manufacturing industrial jobs. Somebody makes a product, they sell it overseas, new monies come in. But Houston, just like every other metropolitan area or city across the country, has been declining in manufacturing jobs or had a slower rate over the past couple years, decades for instance. But we thought that there was a tremendous increase in medical jobs. And you can actually characterize our medical center as a source of primary capital as well. And so we thought, well, we should add the medical jobs to the industrial/manufacturing jobs to be able to account for primary capital coming into the local economy. Any of you who've been to the medical center recently would see, many people, thousands of people from all over the world coming to our medical center in Houston to receive our first-rate services. That's a background on the, just for introduction on the reports that came out, that report. Here's a look at some of the ethnicity type statistics, and I know a lot of you who are really engaged to look at numbers today. Some of you, I apologize, might not be able to see the numbers from the back, but again, this is at the city of Houston level, and what I want you to see is this purple line rising. The takeaway for this black chart, purple line rising is the Hispanic increase from 1980 to 2010, increased from almost 250,000 people only to almost 1 million people by 2010. This green is the white decrease. Almost 1 million people in 1980 and almost 500,000 by 2010. So we don't hear a lot about this, the fact that white people are actually leaving the city of Houston. And that's one of the questions for you is, why would white people be leaving the city? Can we think about reasons why that might be? A lot of people think they're leaving the city to go out to the county areas, but Harris County shows almost similar kind of percentage between black and Hispanic as well. So the racial breakdown, I'm sorry, I'm remiss not to mention the fact that the African American community is kind of growing, but very, very slowly. You can see here still approximately just 500,000 people, but kind of remaining static. This lower line accounts for all the other people from all other races and ethnicities, which I think Houston does a lot of publicity on in terms of our diversity to attract people from all over the world. This gray only accounts for 7% of the total population in Houston. This stat at the bottom, I think, reflects what just happened in our election. We had an 11% voter participation rate. Basically, 97,000 people voted for the mayor. This is a city of 2.1 million people, and to be fair, only 1.6 approximately were of the legal age to vote, right? Now, the county commissioner didn't report that stat. He reported the numbers of registered voters. And so if you do registered voters, we jump up to a higher number. I think he recorded 16%. But really, I think, we should also hold account to those who are of the eligible age and don't register for whatever reason. That's a very low participation rate, and it really begs the question as to whether or not our government is representative of the people of Houston. I'm not sure that elected officials really, hone into that point. Are they considered truly representative of the communities in Houston, the various people, the 2.1 million people in Houston? Not going to get into all the data on that chart. This one you can't really see very well, but what it's showing is the change in population between 1980 and 2010. And I have the entire county, but this kind of white outline is really the city of Houston. And so the red is really the dramatic loss, the census tracts that really lost a lot of population, and the dark green are the ones that grew. So I think most of us are recognizing there is a trend here. This Beltway 8 periphery saw some growth, but you should also recognize that a lot of the losses are scattered throughout the area. So there's no, you can't say we're just losing everybody from the inner city. It's not appropriate. You also can't say we're losing everybody from Beltway 8. It's also not appropriate. It's kind of sporadic losses across the city, which actually makes sense for a city that's not planned. But you should, though, mention the fact that the inner city is losing people, this center of the city there. That loss I was talking about earlier between the white and the black and the Hispanic, I guess, population. So that would be basically, loss from 834,000 people to today 537 people. It's a loss of almost 300,000 people over that 30-year period. And the Hispanic community in reverse has grown by 2.5 times that number over that 30-year period. Annually, the growth rate is minus 12,000 people every year of the white population leaving, and the Hispanics are growing by almost that same number. So it's like a reversal in terms of the city. And as you saw, the black population is kind of streamlined. It doesn't really contribute to that. In terms of policy, we should really look at this Hispanic growth and this black, here's the enrollment at HISD, right? 202,000 students in the Houston Independent School District. Only 15,000 are white. A tremendous number of black students, right? 50,000 students. But look at the number of Hispanic students in HISD. And so we should be clear that we should have policies representing the needs of these particular communities. We should see that in government because it's going to be a change of things. They're not necessarily, although the numbers and populations are switching, certainly the communities and the spaces they occupy in terms of the economy are not switching. And here's an example of that. So we look at the unemployment rate. The blue is the African American unemployment rate. I'm sorry, let me start with the average unemployment, which would be this number here. We're looking at the total being the purple. So it was 8% unemployment in 1990. And we had if you look at all these points, we were actually doing better up until 2000, right? And then the economy tanked, and all these unemployment numbers shot up. Well, almost all. The average was 10% across the city. Look at the Hispanic community, right? 9.3 in 1990. Well, everybody was doing better. The better for Hispanics was less than a percentage point. And when everybody was doing worse, the worse for Hispanics were, again, less than a percentage point. So, my question to you is, how do you explain this Hispanic community not really being affected by the downturn in the economy? I could throw out a challenge to say, does that mean that the Hispanic community is one of the most resilient communities in terms of economic development? I'll leave that question for you guys. What about the African American demographic? Reducing to 3 percentage points in 2000, right? We were all doing better, and then shooting up to 16%. My question would be, does that show that the African American community is the most volatile or vulnerable in terms of economics in the city? I think we have evidence to say this might be true. But again, I'm interested in what your thoughts are on why this might be the case. In terms of income, we're at $44,000 as the average income. And so I'm not sure that $44,000 for an entire city, the fourth largest city in the country, is anything to brag about. I think we should seriously consider what our average income is in this city and wonder, try to come up with ways in which we can increase that. That would probably help towards sustainability and more vulnerability. Here's a dissimilarity index looking at council districts. So the 2012 report was published last year. We have a new report that we just put out. This one was at the council districts. And in this one, I decided to look at dissimilarity indexes to figure out, well, what do we have happening at the council district level? Do we have Hispanic areas, black areas, white areas? How dissimilar are the super neighborhoods, or the council districts, in the city? And so this green is the dissimilarity between Hispanics and white, meaning do we have evidence that the Hispanic community is dissimilar in terms of white neighborhoods? This one is showing the black and the Hispanic community. Do we have evidence that, you know, blacks and Hispanics don't really live together, or whether really the black community is not living in Hispanic neighborhoods? And we have here the blue one showing the similarity between whites and blacks, or whites living in black neighborhoods, etc. Anything over 60 is an issue. And so the lines that really cross the 60 mark are these two, which are the white and black dissimilarity, and they're in districts D and B. So these are the districts to watch in terms of maybe a type of no racial mixing. But we know, it looks like a sign there telling me I have 5 more minutes. I can see the sign. So I'll wrap up. Thank you very much. So basically, but we know D and B are black neighborhoods, right? And we also heard somebody mention earlier, you know, let's come up with ways that we can encourage white communities to move to the black areas. It's a map of a food desert, but that was already covered. I just wanted to mention here that the odds ratio for a black person to live in a food desert as opposed to a white person to live in a food desert in Houston is 1.82 more times. So a black person is 1.8 more 2 times likely to live in a food desert than a white person. And in terms of a Hispanic to white, it's 0.97. Please, you know, how do you explain that Hispanics are not living in food deserts when compared to whites? You know, what are your thoughts on the answer to that? This is a look at how the districts might be broken down by percentage of color and then classified as predominantly being either one color or another. So we can say that maybe these 3 districts are white districts, council district level. We have these 5 districts being Hispanic, but look again here at these 2, which I classified as mixed because it wasn't clear. So potentially Hispanics could be occupying 5 to 7 of the 11 districts in Houston as primarily Hispanic. And then blacks may be either just 1 district, which is District D, where the 3rd Ward and South Houston lies, and or possibly these 2 districts, K and B, which would be 5th Ward and Southwest Houston, out in the lands. I don't have time to get into the actual data, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to come back to the slide. So just to leave you with a few points to, again, evoke some conversation. I'm interested in publishing my answers. I'm sitting on a huge database. If anybody's interested, and you know, you guys are, some of you are students here, if you have good ideas or thoughts on sustainability in Houston and you'd like to collaborate for a published paper, please contact me. I'll be here after the conference, and I'll be happy to maybe discuss your ideas and thoughts. I think several indicators in Houston in general need to be improved for sustainable development. You saw just one doing well, and that's the jobs in terms of medical jobs. We're a majority minority city, and we should have policies reflecting that change. How many policies do we know are specifically geared towards enhancing that? Examples of policy might be education investments, because we know that the public school is primarily minority. And also job stability. You saw there the African American community is very vulnerable, but these 2 kind of go hand in hand, some people think. However, it's safe to say that since African American unemployment rate decreased, we're not talking about people who need jobs, we're talking about people who actually got jobs. And then we saw a lot of those people losing jobs, so that might not be explained by education alone. There may be some underlying issues there. Districts in Houston are created to ensure, one thing that we should talk about, the council districts in Houston where we elect representatives at the highest level were created to solve racial issues back in the 60s. This idea that we have to assign representatives by numbers of people. So they're not really districts created by identifying the ideal neighborhood level and then creating policy for that ideal neighborhood. They're districts actually created around racial lines. And so do we really want to continue, how can we harness that rather, and not just force ourselves into a city that's identified by race? But how can we harness that representative kind of power and create, you know, ideals around better neighborhood designations? And then of course, 3 big indicators that stood out in this study, that would be the food deserts is an issue, again, education, and I would say better paying jobs, not just increasing the job numbers, but better paying jobs. Thank you very much, and apologies for the overtime.
Okay, thank you, Dr. King. Okay, the final item for this panel we have the item titled Parks, Green Access, and Heat Island Effect in Houston. I'm going to call on, acknowledge Dr. Pan. He's our chair of the Urban Plan Environmental Policy Department. We have embarked on actually a new study for us, which is the heat island effect and parks and green access here in Houston. Dr. Pan has blistedly done some excellent research in the heat island effect, and we'll give him the opportunity. He'll come and he'll present the heat island effect, and then when he's finished, I will give a synopsis of the direction we're looking at with parks and green access, and then I'll call the group up. Dr. Pan. Let me assist you. Dr. Pan.
Thank you. Yeah, just to give you a little bit background of this research, I was called by Dr. Bullitt to give a presentation about the urban heat island. I, touched this topic many years ago. I haven't done anything about that in the past 20 years, but it helped me to pick up the topic and use some techniques I learned actually many years ago. Actually, the topic, because as Anthony introduced to you, we separated to two parts. Actually, my part focused on the effects of urban heat island on the racial and the income distribution. For sure, actually, I select Houston for this case study. As you may know, actually, more than half of the world population living in urban areas now, but you may not know, actually, the U.S. is projected to have over 40% increase of urban population in the next 4 decades, which will make U.S. rank among the top 5 country with the fast urban population growth. So, to urban planners, everyone is facing a big challenge, how to accommodate the need of the growing population for jobs, housing, energy, and infrastructure, but at the same time to reduce the negative effects related to urbanization. For example, the effects of urban heat island. As you may know, actually, urban heat island is observed as significantly higher temperature in urban built-up areas than the surrounding rural areas. These figures show you the effect of urban heat island. You can see very high temperature in downtown area and the relatively lower temperature in the rural and the rural farmland. But this only happens in the ideal world, because I will show you what in the real world later. Why actually we have the concern on urban heat island? Because it tends to have a disproportionate impact on the population, especially the vulnerable urban population, such as the minority, the poor, and also the old population, who lack of necessary means to get around the undesirable health effects of urban heat island or extremely heat event. Actually, many of the presenters in this morning and also in this early afternoon already gave you some background about that part. Actually, this study, I actually intended to measure the urban heat island using different data sources, and also I try to examine the effect of the urban heat island on racial and income distribution. The methodology, to measure the urban heat island based on the literature, there are 2 general ways. Actually, one is to measure the urban heat island in air temperature. The other way is in land surface temperature. It's straightforward to measure the urban heat island in air temperature using the data actually connected from the individual weather stations or air monitoring stations. But it requires multiple steps to measure the urban heat island in land surface temperature using actually the thermal band from the satellite images. I will show you the both. Let's look at the steps I used to measure the urban heat island in land surface temperature. The first step is to convert the digital numbers from the satellite images to readings. It's using the spectral readings scale and also the minimum and the maximum digital value. The step 2 is to apply atmospheric correction, because many of the satellite images you got has like a cloud cover. So in ideal world, if we can gather the satellite image with very minor actually cloud cover, then we can skip this step. For the step 3 is convert radians to degrees Kelvin using the inverse of Planck's equation. This is standard way. But we have to pay attention to the thermal constant because the new actually Landsat images have a very different thermal constant and also the digital numbers from the previous Landsat images. And the degree Kelvin has to be converted to brightness temperature in either Celsius degree or Fahrenheit degree, so we can compare it with what we got in the outdoor temperature. So the data, actually the air or the outdoor temperature, I got the data from the continuous ambient monitoring station, the CAMS located in the Houston region. There are about actually 43 CAMS monitoring sites in the Greater Houston region. And the land surface temperature, as I mentioned, I got it from the thermal band of the satellite images. The most recent satellite images, it comes from the Landsat 8. This Landsat 8 just launched in the early of this year. So the data become available in April. So this would be one of the pioneer research on using the Landsat 8 images because most of the other research using the Landsat 7 or even Landsat 4 or 5 images. The socioeconomic characteristics for urban residents come from the American Community Survey. The most recent one would be 2007 to 2011 5-year estimate and at the census block group level because that's the only level we can get. That's the the smallest level we can get both the social characteristics and also the economic characteristics. So these figures show you the data connected from different sources, including the Landsat thermal data. But we cannot use the the image directly because if you look at the number, it's not the real temperature we need because it has the minus 100 to 137, and the air temperature data we got it from the TCEQ, which operated the CAMS monitoring stations, and also the social demographic data we got it from American Community Survey. Okay. Okay, these two figures show you actually what we got. Actually, if you remember, the figure 1 show you what's the urban heat island in the real world. This in the ideal world, these two figures show you what in the real world. Actually, the figure 3 show you the outdoor temperature at Houston on May 13th, and the figure 4 show you the outdoor temperature on August 17th. I will explain why actually I picked these 2 days. If you look at the left one, the one actually of the for temperature in May, you can see actually it's changed actually by different time and also by different locations the temperature. Actually, the urban heat island effect become more obvious in the middle light, 12 a.m. or actually the 6 a.m. That's the early morning time. And these two actually show you that. But in the late afternoon time, actually it's not very clear. And also at a certain distance, for example, like 30 miles from downtown, or actually 40 miles from downtown, it become actually more obvious. Actually, the 30 miles from downtown, this monitoring actually site located in northwest Harris County, and the 40 mile is located in Conroe Airport. This is May 13, and if you look at August 17, you can see actually the pattern has been changed. And the 12 p.m. and also the 6 p.m., that's the high noon to the late afternoon, the urban heat island effect, you can see that at the distance about 30 miles, which is located in northwest Houston. But the early morning, actually the urban heat island is not that clear. So why I pick May 13 and August 17, because I have no choice. When I actually look at the satellite images with least cloud cover, I can only find these two actually date with the cloud cover less than 5%. All the others And I can only find 5 actually with a cloud cover less than 10%. These are the 2 with the least cloud cover. So all the other actually satellite images with cloud cover over 10%. Okay. And even I can do the atmospheric correction, the result I got would not be as accurate as these 2. So I just stick to these 2 data. And you see actually the temperature we got from the monitoring side just for individual point. How about actually for the whole area, we have to do interpolation. The interpolation, actually, the most popular interpolation techniques is the inverse distance weight, IDW. For sure, you can do the kriging, but actually it's just a minor difference. And you can see actually between 2 monitoring sites, the temperature has not been changed much. The temperature has not been changed much. Actually, for a very large area, the temperature looks very similar to each other. So it does not reflect the variation of the temperature in the real world. Okay, so what's in the real world? Let's look at the satellite images. These are the real world. Actually, figure 7 and figure 8 show you the brightness temperature, for these 2 days. For these 2 days. So NASA just asked why actually the white population left the city, because if you pay attention to Harris County, the temperature is much higher than the other place. Okay, and then if we look at the regression result, you can see, okay, it's significantly related to the race distribution. So this one shows you that. Actually, you just look at the temperature, you can see the temperature on May 13th for the whole area is around 99 actually degree. Actually, for August 17th, about 97 degree, not big difference. And the race, actually for different race and ethnic group, you can see big difference. For sure, actually, you can see actually the white group got the lowest temperature, okay, and the Asian group got the highest temperature. Even actually, you see the number, there is no big difference. But if you look at the range of the temperature, actually, it's significantly actually different. And also, if you look at the relationship between the temperature and the risk ethnicity group distribution, you can see for the white group is significantly negative. For the Asian group is significantly positive, which means when you look at the area with higher temperature, you got like a lower percentage of white population, and when you look at the area with higher temperature, you get a higher percentage of Asian population, and it's significantly higher. And if you look at the other risk group, like the African American or Hispanic, for African American it's not significant, and for Hispanic, that's interesting. Actually, with the higher temperature, you can find a significant relationship, but for the relatively lower temperature, it's not that significant, but it's still positive. Okay. For the poverty, for the below poverty, actually the relationship is significantly positive, which means with higher temperature, you may find more people below actually below poverty line, and the median income actually with the higher temperature, you got the people with lower actually median income. That's what I find. So because of the time limit, I will go to my conclusion. So based on the the result, you can see the relationship between temperature and the racial distribution is found significant in Harris County, and also it's different for different race and ethnic groups. And it also finds significant relationship between temperature and income, and the minority and the poor population are more likely to expose to high temperature and suffer more from the urban heat island effect. So the physical planning strategy we adopted for warming mitigation can also be incorporated to an environmental justice framework. Okay, so I leave it to Anthony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pan. Given our time, what I'd like to do with the time we have is to invite the speakers to the podium for the panel, and I'll just give a some of the synopsis or conclusions and the pieces of work we are doing. So if I can get Dr. Earl Ashback and Dr. Geisel, Dr. Pan, be careful. Okay, okay, the panel's up here. This section today was on the oral section. It was on healthy people, healthy places, and just sustainability. I'm just going to pose one brief question from the work we are doing based on analysis of Harris County residents of voting age from the four institutional sectors: the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the business sector, and the household. The question I was seeking in that institutional analysis was to see which sector moves and potentially could move change, which sector is willing or more willing to change in the sustainability question. We had a sample size of 399. Of that, 60% were of the households. But just to give one piece of information that came from that survey, we found that the people in general have a high expectation from their public leaders. From that survey, they expected them to be willing to do things to make positive change that has the impact on the quality of life, the impact on the wellness of people in the community. One piece of information we did find out, I'm going to go just very, very quickly. This was the survey size here. As you see, the households were 69%. The public was 15.5, the non-for-profit was 8.1, and the non-profit was 7.14. What was one of the very interesting information that came out was that the private sector was willing to change in conjunction with the households when it came to deal with sustainability. They saw a potential measure of opportunity. If you look at the private sector, they probably saw a potential measure of opportunity right there. The factors we looked at was primarily social change, environment, economics, and governance. We looked at over spatial ecosystems, the neighborhood, at the lot, and at the community. And I'm just going to go quickly to just going to ask the questions. Quickly, if we look at in the park access, you found that the issues of parks in the Houston area, you found that we are underserved. And from Dr. Buller, I must say, I expected to find something completely different. I wasn't expecting to find that most of the census tracts, the districts, didn't have sufficient parks. I expected to find that they were all fine. But just yesterday, Dr. Pan told me, forget what you think is going to show up. Look what the numbers did. And it showed that the minority population in Houston is definitely underserved if you measure the distance to a park from within a quarter mile of the park. And this is the map that depicts that right here. If you look at all the red dots by themselves, which is the smaller dots, those are census tracts that are outside of a quarter mile or half mile to a park right now. And I'd like to go to the final so I can get to the questions. I'll go to, and this map here, this demonstrates a potential willingness of the community as a whole for growth, meaning to increase the green space within the whole of Harris County, actually. The dark green depicts the way the people said themselves, we want more green. And I can point them with the mouse so you can see it right here. Right here. Those were expected, they wanted more green. And finally, for the questions I want to draw, these were the sectors: the nonprofit, the household, the business, the public, and a movement. The question I had is the ideas of planners as gatekeepers. Are planners, those of us who are here, willing to ask the hard questions and stand up for quality of life, stand up for protecting the environment, stand up for sustainability for those right now, but those who've not yet, which is really the creed of all planners. my questions were, the sectors matter. The study did show public health and well-being can drive change. Cumulative action and multi-sectorism is an important dynamic, meaning we have to bring all the persons back in place. Those who are affected. For instance, the old way of measuring parks is number of acres per population, but now we really should be considering quality of a park and those who are within the distance and their demographics. Do they have what they really need? That should be the measurement for parks now. And if we use this social equity lens, you'll find that just the raw, what you call carrying capacity numbers doesn't work anymore for us. It has to be, does it meet the needs of those who are there? And on that, I would say thank you, and thank you for a brief 5-10 minutes. And if we can, the mics are now working. If you have questions to pose to any of the panelists right now, we have still, for questions, about 10 minutes. One was coming, I'll come to you next, please.
Hi, thank you guys for presenting today. Your presentations are very interesting. I have one question for, I didn't catch your name.
Lester King.
Dr. King.
Dr. King. Regarding the, I guess, the demographics you were choosing to show as far as unemployment is concerned, and you were asking, you know, why are the Latino populations consistent? And I was wondering, are you, like, I noticed it's from the Census Bureau, and so I was wondering if you were counting in also immigration, problems with, you know, people who live in the United States but aren't able to vocalize the money that they're actually receiving or not receiving. As far as for the Black community as well, there's also a large group of immigrants that occupy, you know, the United States, which is awesome. It's awesome, but you know, I didn't see that data in your slide. So, and I want to know, like, why or if you're planning to include that sometime.
So you're wondering if I was able to capture undocumented people living in the country? So, and I want to link this answer to what Anthony was talking about in terms of the different responses to sustainable development from the three different sectors, the social guys, the economic guys, and the environmental guys. So, you know, when we did the social workshop, that was the most contentious of all the workshops. When we did the economic workshop, that was quite streamlined. You know, we found that folks would come and it would be clear how to set up a goal strategy kind of indicator to get results. When it came to the environmental sector, it was also quite streamlined because they felt as if, first of all, they felt as if, you know, when it comes to the region, Houston can't really do a whole lot, but it can contribute because environmental concerns are wider. Going back to what I started with, the social section with all the contention, one of the questions was from this person. I guess it probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to call the person's name, but the person was talking about the fact that in the census, we actually have undocumented people responding to the census. And so most of us, we have a sense that some of these undocumented people probably would not participate, but we know that we can capture some of them. Certainly primary research, you know, if yourself or some other group of students were interested in getting out there to capture some primary research on undocumented residents and their aspirations, it would be helpful. I don't think there's a way that we could roll that into total counts for people in the city, but it would be important to understand those communities and their needs and what they would like in the future.
Yeah, I was just saying that because, sorry to interrupt you, because that is a large portion of the Houston population, and also it could definitely lead to a skewing of your information that you're presenting.
So I'm not sure.
Just a critique, because
I'm not sure that we should characterize it as a large portion because we don't have the data. But certainly it's a portion that should be captured in research. And it sounds like a job for you.
What I think would be good if we can do is probably, remember we will be carrying on many of these conversations again, sometimes via a live webcast. If I can coin is there the next question for any of the panelists? Right. Dr. Ewell, please.
I have actually two questions. The first one will be for you, Lester, but I will respond to the question, or one of the questions among the many that you raised during your presentation, which is, why is it, considering the number of the minority majority in the city, that the voter participation rate is not very encouraging? And the answer to it is that is because of the public cynicism, and given what is going on in the Washington Capitol Hill in this day and age, I don't think citizens are willing to participate fully at the local level. Reason being, as you might have noticed based on earlier presentations, as it pertains to NIMBY, not in my neighborhood, or PIMBY, place it in black neighborhood or yard or what have you, as scholars like Dr. Bullard might say best. That's when minorities will mobilize themselves for social action. When it comes to voter participation at the local level, in as much as all politics is local as we learned it from Tip O'Neill, may he rest in peace. When I ran for the school board in South Independent School District in 2006, if my memory serves me well, the registered voters in that area happens to be 97,000. Only 2,000 people voted. I nearly beat an incumbent. I got 38%. The point that I'm making is that when it comes to local elections, it doesn't matter whether it's school board, council elections, mayoral races, citizens don't give a heck. Whatever you want.
So I'd like to offer, and you know, I have to be honest here. When I saw the election close, the first thing I did was to go to the website. Harris County keeps an excellent website on data on who participated in the elections, if any of you are interested. The first thing I did was to go to look at the data, who participated, who voted, how did they vote. And you don't get demographics, it probably wouldn't be appropriate, but you can actually download the names and addresses of the people who voted. So any student in this room who wants to do some analysis of the probability that a person coming from a census tract is black can probably put some demographics to the numbers. That said, I'd like to think that you're right. It has to do with NIMBYism. It has to do with the average citizen in Houston relating to the council members. And it has been proposed that, you know, each council district, because they are representing 200,000 people approximately, that's really too large. And it's kind of inefficient for that elected official to be able to get down to represent the interests of all of these citizens. And perhaps you need something, a level of governance closer to the people. And we should commend former Mayor Lee Brown, who came up with the super neighborhoods idea, which was an attempt to come down closer to the residents and have an intermediary level so that they, in collective, these super neighborhoods, there are 88 of them in the city, you know, 8 times more than the council districts. They can take their SIP recommendations to city council, and it frees up city council to do the larger administrative tasks. Below the super neighborhood level, we have our neighborhood associations, and not every neighborhood in the city is governed by an active neighborhood association. So I think we should pay attention to the super neighborhoods in Houston as an avenue for governance for sustainability in the city.
We basically have...
I raised it for Lorraine as it pertains to the disparity between African American men and Anglo men as it pertains to BMI or obesity, as she referenced it. I think you might be referring to an already published study. If so, if one factors into that equation income variable or any quality of life index, however is defined, doing different or means type of analysis, you might find out that even if that proportion is significant, it will disappear.
Okay. Before you answer, can we just take the next question, then answer them simultaneously? Get the question, and then we'll answer them together. Thank you very much.
My question is also for Dr. Reitzel. I want to know, and I guess this is related to what was just said, I'm interested in knowing whether consideration has been given to the number of people in a household. Like, is it a single, you know, if you have a single family household and there's no help and you get home and you've got to cook and there are children, are you less likely? And then also the type of job that you have. I sit all day at the computer. I pass by 4 fast food places on my way home. I never stop there because after sitting at the computer, I have enough energy to come home and cook. So I just wonder if those are variables that are being looked at.
Well, thank you for your questions. I think I'm not familiar with studies that do look at those 2 variables that you mentioned, but certainly you can imagine that they play into it. I know I have a 2-year-old and a job that requires more than 40 hours a week and a long commute, and I pass fast food on the way home too. And it's pretty tempting to be able to, because I know my kid's going to get home 5 minutes after I get home, and I don't have time to make that, so to make a healthy meal. So we haven't looked at it, but it's certainly important variables to consider. And I think I'm having a little bit more difficulty because it was a little while ago remembering exactly what your point was, but I know that you were specifically mentioning African American men and
38% versus 36.
right, and so
Differential being 2%.
that's not that much.
Argument
Yeah.
is, if you do difference of means type of analysis, factoring the income variable, it might disappear because there might be a confounding variable.
That's right.
Even if that variable is not the income variable.
Absolutely, that could be the case. And with our sample, the data that we actually presented on, 75% women in that sample. So more representative for women, our results were perhaps more generalizable to women for that particular study.
We have actually run out of time, but if I can ask the audience, I'll get one final question from Dr. Wood, but before he has his question, I think this group has a lot more to talk about. Would you, the audience, be willing to convene maybe an online conversation? We'll put it together, go to invisiblehouston.com, tweet it, Facebook it, let us know you're interested in this particular session, and maybe we can bring this group back together again and use some of this great technology we have put together here through Texas Southern and carry on the conversation on panel number 3. And that we'll get the final question from Dr. Woods, and then we'll close for a break and go to panel 4. Dr. Woods.
First of all, I want to thank the panelists for their insight. One of the tests of quality research is that we generate more questions than answers, and you certainly have done that. But is it Dr. Rizzo?
Yes.
Dr. Rizzo, I'm just wondering, based on your research,
Yes.
and I'm assuming they may have not been incorporated into your research, but the consideration as to whether fast food industries were purposely using certain demographics to formulate location theories. Secondly, did your research consider looking at the density of what I would call full service, low quality restaurants serving high cholesterol, high trans fat types of food, as opposed to the more healthy full service restaurants located in and around predominantly African American communities?
Your second point is certainly an excellent one, and we should do that analysis. That would be a very interesting one to do. I'm sorry, I'm now trying to get my mind back to the...
Race, income, to determine location.
Using
Don't you think? I mean, it's all about money, so yeah. And actually, after we published that study, I know we need to go, so I'll wrap it up real fast, but somebody contacted me who actually used to work for a fast food restaurant in a high corporate role, and he talked about how they would change the menu and the things that they emphasized in menus based on the characteristics of the neighborhood. And so for lower SES, more minority neighborhoods, they would offer more sides that were cheaper, but they were much higher fat and much higher salt content and that kind of thing, because that was what the folks there were purchasing. But of course that has a lot of implications on health. So yeah, chicken or the egg.
Well,
thank you.
On that, thank you everyone again. As I said, please look for the announcement. We will continue this conversation on panel number 3. We have a break right now. We will reconvene at 2:55. I'll give you the 10 minutes. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. Thank you, panelists, very much.
you.